Dr. Furman said, I was raised on a small farm outside of Kansas City, and my dad is a good man. He's a harsh man, but he's a good man. And my dad did not like to fool around when there was a problem. If there was any sort of issue, my father would tell you straight up that your attitude needed to be changed because something was wrong. And I hate to tell you today, brothers and sisters, but we've got a problem. And it's all of us. It's you and it's me. And that problem is this, that when we look at the life of Jesus Christ, and when we look at the teachings of Jesus Christ, for some reason our minds automatically jump to the conclusion that Jesus Christ was one of us, a contemporary 21st century American Christian. And unfortunately, in doing that, we do a disservice and a dishonor to our Savior. Because he wasn't talking to us when he was talking to people in the New Testament. He wasn't speaking to you and me. I hate to break it to you. He was talking to somebody specific, and he was talking to those people. And he was telling them the way it should be for what was applicable to their lives. And if we're unwilling to figure out what it was that Jesus Christ was saying to those people then, it is impossible for us to actually figure out what Christ wants for our lives today. So today, as we take a look at a snippet of the Sermon on the Mount, I hope that you will be willing and open-minded to consider that an interpretation you might not have always heard since you were a child, but is based instead on what history tells us about the people that Jesus was talking to, may be in reality what Jesus was looking for. And he starts in verse 38. Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said," that's really loud, "eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person." You see, Jesus was trying to correct a problem. He was trying to correct an issue that they had had. And by doing that, he first brings up an Old Testament text that they would remember, something from the law. And it's found in Leviticus chapter 24, beginning in verse 19. It says, "If anyone injures his neighbor, whatever he has done must be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has injured the other, so is he to be injured. Whoever kills an animal must make restitution, but whoever kills a man must be put to death." And to our ears that sounds a little bit harsh, but God's purpose was good in his law. You see, this law protected people from the terrible things that other ancient Near Eastern cultures would do to each other. They had a view that suggested, if someone is to strike me, I can do double the punishment to them. And if someone kills someone in my family, I can take out their entire family. Because revenge is deep amongst most people. But God's law says that what has been done must be done in equal and no more. But Jesus says that's not good enough. He says, "You've heard it said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person." That word resist, our American translations have done a pretty poor job of trying to act out what that would be. We see that also in Ephesians when it talks about putting on the armor of God and standing against evil. And it implies a specific military context. Those two armies in the ancient world would come against each other, and the moment when they were about to strike directly against each other, they would be considered to stand against one another. This has to be a military context. And the RSV has translated this about as best as any American translation when it says, "But I tell you, do not violently oppose an evil person." Because in reality, what we're talking about here is we're talking about situations of violence and oppression. And what Jesus is going to do for us is he's going to provide three portraits of people who are living in oppression and violence, who instead of resorting to oppression and violence to get out of those situations, instead resort to a third way. And the first example is this. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Now, when you think about it, if you were going to strike someone on the cheek, right? In our normal, what we would think about slapping someone open palm, probably with our right dominant hand. What you have to remember is that in the time of Christ, the right hand was the only option that you had, okay? So, in reality, what's happening is their left hand is completely out of the question because it was reserved for certain bathroom activities only, okay? And so they could only use their right hand, and if their right hand is slapping their right cheek, it has to be a backhand. And in the time of Jesus Christ, the backhand was reserved for very specific situations. One, if a young Jewish child or a growing up Jewish person was to be caught in heresy by an elder, he could be backhanded. It was a symbol of utmost disrespect. A Jew could be backhanded by a Roman soldier for getting out of line, for saying something he should not have said. And a slave could be backhanded by his master when he had acted out of line or asserted himself as more than what he was. So you see, when Jesus says that, he then says, turn to him the other cheek also. Now, when you think about it, if the other cheek is the only one that is available for striking at this point, and the right hand is the only hand available for striking, he no longer can backhand that person, but instead is only left with two options. Either an open hand slap or the slap of a woman. I love women. But in biblical times, that was not okay. You know, this is a sissy slap, you might call it, right? This is not something that a one man would do to another man. Or his other option is to clench fist strike the man, a punch. But the thing is that when you punched a man in Jesus' time, that showed, at the same time as showing that you wanted to confront them, it showed a level of respect. Because it showed that you were an equal to them. Because if you weren't their equal, they'd have backhanded you and you would have shut up and been put in your place. So what we see here is a portrait of a person who is being oppressed, who is being torn down and being told you can't assert yourself to the status with which you've asserted yourself to. Instead, you need to be brought back down and be quiet and be where you're supposed to be. But Jesus says, turn to them the other cheek and force them to either make a fool of themselves or to bring you as their equal. That's our first portrait. In the second one, we see that it says, I lost my place. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. Now in this time, you only wore two pieces of garment, a tunic and a cloak. And according to Old Testament law, if you were being sued for your clothes, you were not allowed to be sued for your tunic. As a matter of fact, interest rates had gotten so high at the time of Christ from wealthy landowners that literally the landowners were coming after everything that they had. They would sue them for their land, their property, and then they would eventually sue them for the clothes off their very back. We see someone who is so poor and downtrodden in society that literally all they had left are the clothes on their back. And this man is suing him for his tunic. But Old Testament law said you could only sue for someone's cloak. And then at the end of the day, it had to be returned to the original owner so that they could stay warm at night. This is an infraction of the law of God. And Jesus says, if someone tries to sue you and take the tunic off your back, go ahead and give them your coat as well. Now you can figure out that if there were only two garments, they were left in their birthday suit, okay? They were naked. Yes. And to those people, that is super offensive that this person would be standing there naked in a courtroom and handing his clothes over to this person to whom is suing him. But when you think about the implication of such, when someone is suing someone for the very clothes off their back, just part of it, leaving them at least something to cover up with. But when a man is willing to say, you know what? If you want everything I have, why don't you just take it? Because you can't take my dignity. Because I'm better than that. You see, in this situation, they've brought themselves at least to a position when they can assert to that person to whom is suing them that at the very least, this is unacceptable. And I hope that you can take this opportunity to think about what you're doing. Our second portrait. And in our third portrait of the oppressed,